To understand the sheer magnitude of our defeat, you have to understand the height of the horse we were riding. My name is Sky, 26 years old, master's degree in post-colonial societal structures. I paid my bills by pouring latte art for tech bros I secretly despised, but my real job was maintaining the hive. It wasn't just an apartment, it was a fortress of ideological purity. My roommates were Juniper, a freelance energy healer who claimed she could smell bad intentions through Wi-Fi, and Beatrix, a digital activist who believed retweeting was the highest form of praxis. We didn't have house rules, we had a manifesto of shared existence. We didn't have chores, we had cycles of care. If you slammed a door, it was an act of sonic violence. We had curated a bubble of sage smoke and moral superiority so thick you could choke on it. We had identified the enemy, the patriarchy, the system, the man. We were ready to dismantle them until the day the man raised our rents by 40% and we realized our emotional currency wasn't legal tender. Our landlord, Mr. Henderson, wasn't a monster, but he was a boomer, which in our eyes was effectively the same thing. He cited market adjustments. We tried to pay him in exposure, offering to feature his building on Beatrix's blog, which had dozens of readers on a good day. He declined. He wanted money. We did the math during a frantic emergency alignment meeting. Even if Juniper took on extra aura cleansings and I picked up double shifts at the Fair Trade Coffee Co-op, we were short. We needed a fourth. The hive had a small, unfinished den in the back, essentially a glorified closet with a window facing a brick wall. We advertised on all the safe platforms. We wanted a femme-identifying, non-conforming, eco-conscious spirit. We got 0 replies. 2 weeks before eviction, Mr. Henderson called. He had a nephew. The nephew needed a place in the city for 6 months while he worked a contract. His name was Brock. I remember physically recoiling at the name. It sounded like the noise a wrench makes when it hits a skull. Absolutely not, I told the girls. A man named Brock? He'll probably hang taxidermy and drink domestic beer. It will disrupt the vibrational frequency of the home. But reality, as it often does, cared very little for our vibrations. It was Brock or the street. We decided to interview him, convinced we could scare him off with our sheer intensity. He arrived on a Tuesday. He drove a truck, not a cute vintage pickup, but a massive, scarred white work truck with ladders on the rack and mud on the tires. He walked in wearing Carhartt pants that were actually dirty from work, not fashion, and steel-toed boots that clunked heavily on our reclaimed wood floors. He was in his late 30s, thick-necked with a buzz cut and eyes that looked like they'd seen things vastly more tiring than a Twitter thread. We sat him down in the circle. Juniper had lit sage. The air was thick with smoke. I took the lead. "Listen," I said, projecting my best authority voice. "This isn't a frat house. This is a sanctuary. We have rules, strict rules." Brock just looked at me. He didn't blink. He looked like a statue made of beef jerky and indifference. "Okay," he grunted. His voice was a low rumble like gravel in a cement mixer. I pulled out the contract. We had spent all night drafting it. The Harmonious Coexistence Treaty. Clause 1. No meat in the shared fridge. The vibration of death disturbs the vegetables. Clause 2. Silence after 9 p.m. We need to process our emotional labor. Clause 3. He had to use the service entrance in the alley so as not to track toxic residue into the main foyer. Clause 4. A monthly carbon and emotional offset fee of $75 on top of rent to compensate us for the burden of sharing space with a cisgendered male. I read them out, waiting for him to explode, waiting for the entitlement. Instead, he pulled a checkbook out of his back pocket. He scribbled a check for the first month, last month, security deposit, and the offset fee. He tore it out and placed it on the coffee table. I work 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. I shower at the gym. I eat dinner at the diner down the street. I just need a place to sleep that isn't my truck. Is the room in the back? We were stunned into silence. Yes, Beatrix squeaked. He nodded, stood up, and walked to the back room. He closed the door. We heard the lock click. We had won, technically, but it felt wrong. He hadn't fought. He hadn't argued. He had just purchased us. It's fine, I reassured the girls later, over cups of herbal tea. He's clearly intimidated by our power. He'll keep his head down. We just have to hold the line. We had a friend, Julian. Julian was our rock. He was a poet and a theoretical activist who was writing a manifesto on the dismantling of the nuclear family. He came over the next day to cleanse the space after Brock's arrival. You are brave, Julian told us, lounging on our beanbag chair, sipping the wine we bought. To live in the belly of the beast, to invite the oppressor in and force him to fund his own dismantling. It's praxis. Julian was thin, pale, and had soft hands that smelled of lavender lotion. He understood us. He nodded when we vented. Brock, meanwhile, was invisible. We barely saw him for the first 3 weeks. We'd hear the heavy front door open at 5:45 a.m. We'd hear it open again at 6:30 p.m. Then, footsteps to the back room. Silence. Sometimes, late at night, the smell of sawdust or motor oil would drift from under his door, violating our lavender-scented air. But he paid the fee. He followed the rules. We started to get complacent. We figured we had tamed the beast. Then came the rain. It wasn't just rain. It was a deluge, a once-in-a-decade storm that battered the city for 3 days straight. On the second night, the hive began to fail. We were in the living room listening to Julian recite his latest slam poetry about the fluidity of water when a drop hit Beatrix on the nose. She looked up. A dark, ominous stain was spreading across the plaster ceiling. Drip, drip, splat. Within minutes, it wasn't a drip. It was a steady stream of dirty, cold water pouring right onto our ethically sourced rug. Panic ensued. "The structural integrity is compromised," Beatrix yelled, clutching her laptop. "The water element is out of balance," Juniper cried, grabbing crystals. I turned to Julian. "Do something!" Julian stood up, looking grave. "This is a manifestation of the building's sorrow," he announced. "We must bear witness to its decay. We should document this. It's a powerful metaphor." He pulled out his phone and started filming the leak for his Instagram story. "I'm calling the landlord," I shouted, grabbing my phone. Voicemail, of course. The water was coming faster now. We put buckets under it, but the ceiling was sagging, looking like a pregnant belly about to burst. "We need to get on the roof," I said, looking at Julian. "We need to cover it." Julian looked at the window where rain was slashing sideways. "It's too dangerous," he said, shrinking back. "And frankly, participating in the maintenance of a capitalist structure feels wrong. We should let it collapse and rebuild from the ashes." "My bed is under the ashes, Julian!" I screamed. Just then, the back door opened. Brock walked in. He was wearing a t-shirt and boxers, holding a toothbrush. He looked at the chaos. He looked at the stream of water. He looked at the buckets. He looked at Julian filming the ceiling. He didn't say a word. He turned around and went back into his room. "See," I seethed, pointing at his closed door. "Cowardice. He sees a crisis and hides. Typical." 2 minutes later, Brock emerged. He was fully dressed in his work gear. Rain jacket, boots, headlamp strapped to his forehead. He was carrying a massive blue tarp and a cordless drill. He walked past us like we were furniture. He opened the window to the fire escape. A gust of wind and rain blasted into the room, extinguishing our candles. "Hey!" Julian yelled. "You're letting the negativity in." Brock ignored him, climbed out the window, and disappeared up the ladder to the roof. We stood there, freezing, listening to the storm. Above us, we heard heavy footsteps thudding on the roof deck. Thump, thump, whir. The sound of the drill biting into wood. Whir, whir. It went on for 10 minutes. He was up there in the gale force wind in the pitch black. Slowly, the dripping slowed. Then it stopped. The sagging bubble in the ceiling held, but no new water was feeding it. 5 minutes later, Brock climbed back through the window. He was soaked to the bone. Water dripped from his nose and his chin. He shook himself off like a wet dog, spraying Julian with cold water. Roof hatch blew open, Brock grunted. Tarped it, screwed it down. Should hold till the landlord gets a crew out. He wiped his face with his sleeve. Julian cleared his throat. Well, he said, adjusting his scarf, while mechanical intervention is one approach, I feel we shouldn't discount the collective energy we projected toward the... Brock just looked at him. It wasn't a mean look. It was worse. It was a look of total biological dismissal, like a lion looking at a leaf. Brock walked to his room and shut the door. We stood in the silence, the only sound the dry rattling of the wind against the glass. He used toxic plastics, Juniper whispered weakly, referring to the tarp. Yeah, he did. But I looked at the dry floor. I looked at Julian, who was checking his likes on the video of the leak. A small, cold knot of doubt formed in my stomach. We didn't talk about it. We just cleaned up the buckets. Life returned to normal, but the vibe was off. Beatrix stopped complaining about Brock's boots in the hallway. Juniper started leaving the hallway light on for him when he came home late. But I held firm. He fixed it because he didn't want his stuff to get wet, I argued during our next meeting. It was an act of selfishness, not altruism. Don't mistake self-preservation for heroism. Julian agreed vehemently. Exactly. He colonized the roof space to protect his territory. But the universe wasn't done testing us. A month later, the collective van died. It was a 1995 VW Eurovan that we ran on biodiesel. It was the heart of our operations. We used it to pick up our CSA shares and transport Julian's performance art props. We were on the highway, coming back from a protest against suburban sprawl. Me, Juniper, Beatrix, and Julian. The van shuddered, made a sound like a dying cow, and coasted to a halt on the shoulder. Steam poured from the hood. We sat there as cars whizzed by at 80 miles per hour. Okay, I said, trying to remain calm. Julian, you know cars. You have that vintage moped. Julian looked terrified. I know aesthetics, I clarified. I know how a vehicle represents freedom. I don't know the inside parts. We popped the hood anyway. It was a hot, oily mess of hoses and metal. We stared at it. Maybe it's overheated, Juniper suggested. It's picked up on our anxiety. We need a tow, Beatrix said. I'm looking up rates. Oh God, it's like $300 just for the hookup. We didn't have $300. We barely had gas money. We sat on the side of the highway for an hour. It started to get dark. Julian suggested we hitchhike, framing it as radical trust in the community. I looked at the semi-trucks roaring past and decided radical trust was a good way to end up in a ditch. Call him, Beatrix said softly. Who? I asked, playing dumb. Brock. No, I said, absolutely not. I will not be a damsel in distress calling the big, strong man. I have to pee, Juniper whined, and I'm hungry. I can't feel my fingers, Julian added unhelpfully. I gritted my teeth. I pulled out my phone. I had Brock's number from the lease agreement. I texted him. Van trouble, I-95 South, mile marker 42. Do you know a mechanic? He replied in 30 seconds. Sit tight, on my way. 40 minutes later, the white work truck pulled up behind us. The amber hazard lights flashing reflected off the wet pavement. It looked safe. It looked incredibly, undeniably safe. Brock got out. He was wearing grease-stained coveralls. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how we were feeling. He popped the hood of his truck, then walked to ours. He had a flashlight in his mouth. He leaned into the engine bay of our van. Belt snapped, he mumbled around the light. Water pump stopped, overheated. He walked back to his truck. He rummaged in the back. The sound of metal clanking was music. He came back with a spare belt. Why did he have a spare belt for a VW? I don't know, he just did. A jug of coolant and a wrench. Julian, Brock said. It was the first time he'd ever said Julian's name. Julian jumped. Yes? Hold the light. He handed the flashlight to Julian. For the next 20 minutes, we watched. Brock's hands moved with a brutal, efficient grace. He wasn't gentle. He yanked, twisted, and forced the machine to submit. He burnt his hand on the radiator. He didn't yelp. He just wiped the grease on his pants and kept working. Start it, he barked at me. I climbed into the driver's seat. I turned the key. The van roared to life. It sounded better than it had in years. I turned it off and got out. Brock was wiping his hands on a rag. It'll get you home, he said. Get a real mechanic to look at the tensioner tomorrow. Thank you, Juniper breathed. You saved us. Just machinery, Brock shrugged. He looked at Julian, who was still holding the flashlight, shivering in his thin cardigan. You guys good to drive? Brock asked. Yes, I said. My voice was small. Okay, I'll follow you back, just in case. We drove home in silence. The big white truck was in our rear-view mirror the whole way, its headlights cutting through the dark. Julian tried to break the tension. You know, he mused, there's something problematic about the fetishization of manual labor. It reduces the human to a cog in the... Shut up, Julian, Livia snapped. Shut the fuck up, Beatrix added. I said nothing. I just watched the headlights behind us. When we got home, Brock parked, waited for us to get inside, and then parked his truck. He walked in through the back alley entrance, as per the rules. He went to his room. The next morning, I found a receipt on the counter. It was for the belt and the coolant, $45. Next to it was a note. Take it out of the offset fee. I stared at the note. The offset fee. The money we charged him for the emotional labor of tolerating him. He had saved us hundreds of dollars. He had saved us from danger. And he used his own money to do it, then asked for reimbursement from the tax we levied on his existence. I felt like garbage. Hot, steaming garbage. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. The final blow came in the heat of July. A massive heat wave hit the city. 105 degrees with 90% humidity. The air was like soup. The power grid buckled. Brownouts rolled across the city. Then a transformer down the street exploded. We heard the boom. The hive went dark and silent and hot. Our fridge, full of expensive organic produce and fermented goods, began to warm. The AC, which we only used in emergencies, was dead. Within 4 hours, the apartment was an oven. We sat in the living room, sweating. Julian was there, of course. He was lying on the floor, shirtless, moaning. "The heat death of the universe," he whispered. "We are returning to the womb of the sun." "I'm going to throw up," Beatrix said. She looked pale. "My kombucha SCOBY is going to die," Juniper wailed. "It's a living organism." I was trying to fan myself with the copy of The Dialectic of Enlightenment, but it wasn't helping. The door to the back room opened. Brock walked out. He was wearing shorts and a tank top. He looked annoyed, but focused. He walked to the kitchen. He opened the fridge, felt the air, and frowned. He looked at us. "You got perishables?" he asked. "Yes," Juniper cried. "Everything, our whole supply." Brock nodded. He walked out the back door. We heard him rummaging in his truck. He came back with a heavy yellow device, a portable power station, and a solar panel that folded out like a briefcase. He set the solar panel in the window facing the sun. He plugged the station into it. Then he ran an extension cord from the battery to the fridge. The fridge hummed to life. The sound was beautiful. "It won't run the AC," Brock said, "but it'll keep the food cold and charge phones. Don't open the fridge door unless you have to." He then pulled a battery-powered construction fan from his room and set it up in the center of the living room, pointed at us. The breeze hit my face. It wasn't cold, but it was moving air. It felt like mercy. He pulled a cooler of water from his room and handed bottles to everyone, including Julian. Julian took the water. He didn't make a speech. He just drank it. Brock sat down on a dining chair, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Grid's gonna be down for a while," he said. "Transformer blew. Saw the smoke." We sat there in the dim light, the fan whirring, the fridge humming on borrowed power. I looked at Julian. He was soft. He was eloquent. He knew all the right words. He could deconstruct a narrative in his sleep. But in the face of heat, gravity, and entropy, he was useless. He was a luxury item. I looked at Brock. He was rough. He was silent. He probably didn't know what intersectionality meant. But he could stop water. He could fix engines. He could make electricity. He was essential. Our ideology was built on the idea that men like Brock were the problem, that they were dinosaurs, aggressors, the source of the world's pain. But sitting there, drinking his water, cooled by his fan, eating food saved by his battery, I realized we were the children and he was the adult. We had built a fortress of words, and it had crumbled the moment the wind blew. He had built nothing but solutions. The silence stretched on. Finally, Beatrix spoke. "Brock?" He looked up from his phone. "Yeah? Can you teach me how to check the oil in the van?" He blinked. "Sure, when it cools down." Juniper spoke up. "Do you want some of the kale salad before it goes bad?" Brock hesitated. "Does it have nutritional yeast?" "Yes." "I'll pass. I got jerky." We didn't even get mad. I stood up. I walked over to the wall where the Harmonious Coexistence Treaty was taped. The edges were curling from the humidity. I ripped it down. The sound of the tape tearing was loud in the quiet room. Brock watched me. Julian watched me. I crumpled the paper into a ball. "It's stupid," I said. My voice shook a little. "The fee, the rules, it's stupid." I looked at Brock. "I'm sorry," I said. It hurt to say it. It physically hurt my ego. Brock looked at me. He looked at the crumpled paper. He took a sip of his water. "Don't worry about it," he said. "Just maybe keep the hallway clear of shoes. I tripped last night." "Okay," I said. "We can do that." Julian sat up. "Sky, are you sure you want to capitulate to the—" "Julian," I said, cutting him off. "Do you have a generator?" "Well, no, but—" "Then shut up." Julian shut up. The power came back on 2 days later. Life changed in the hive. We didn't become best friends. We didn't watch football with him. But the offset fee stopped. The fridge became communal. When things broke, we didn't call a meeting to discuss the spiritual implications. We asked Brock what tool we needed. And sometimes he showed us. Beatrix learned to change a tire. I learned how to unclog a P-trap. Julian stopped coming around as much. We had less patience for his poetry. One evening, months later, I came home to find Brock in the kitchen. He was eating a steak, a massive, rare ribeye. The smell filled the house. 6 months ago, I would have staged a protest. I would have burned sage until the fire alarm went off. I walked in. I put my bag down. "Smells good," I said. And the terrifying thing was, I meant it. Brock looked up, surprised. He cut a piece. "Want a bite?" he asked. I looked at the meat. I looked at the man. I thought about the roof, the van, the heat. I picked up a fork. "Yeah," I said. "I do." We ate in silence. It was the best thing I had tasted in years. Reality had won. And honestly, it tasted pretty good.